Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to today's bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below, merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely matter, and they are appreciated. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into it, shall we?
Tonight's first encounter. I grew up in Michigan, and I would stay with my aunt and cousin during the summer and sometimes during breaks. I was only 10 years old, but I remember it so vividly. It was June 21st of 2003, my birthday, and the summer solstice was upon us. The full moon illuminated everything in its path in this gray-washed light. We had extremely rural property, a very large house with a small farm, although not much livestock, a couple of cows, a chicken coop, and a horse named Brandy. My 10th birthday was wonderful. It was full of cake and presents and balloons, and love from my wonderful aunt and cousin. It was about 10 o'clock, and my aunt had always thought that it was safe on the property, because there was always a lack of natural predators such as bear, wolf, cougar, and coyote. So she really never minded if we went out. This particular night was gorgeous to me, and I thought I would go out and soak up some of the moonlight. I told my aunt and cousin, and they told me to be back in an hour. I asked my cousin if he wanted to go with me, but he preferred to watch TV instead. Now, the property is huge. The back of the house faced the nearby woods. But to get to that, you would have to go through a field of very tall grass, which was about to my shoulders. And then you'd have to cross a small stretch of clearing. I decided to wander through it. I was walking through the grass, looking straight ahead of me, when something seemed to just appear before my eyes. It was tall, muscular, and very large. Its color was orange, and it seemed to be busy with something. It was just at the end of the long grass, and it was bending down. It was very hairy as well, and I focused my eyes on it. Then it stood. On its hind legs, no doubt, and in its mouth was what seemed to be a deer carcass. It was munching and crunching on it, feasting. It was so wolf-like, but I knew it wasn't a wolf of any kind. It had an unnatural and unsettling feeling to it. I had heard stories of what was called the Michigan Dogman, but this one seemed different. All of the encounters seemed similar to this one, but here's the thing. The Dogman was described as a grayish-black coat in color, not orange or any chestnut. I stood there dumbfounded, shocked. Then it turned its head toward me. I ducked down and curled into a tight ball. Tears rolled down my face as I waited for what I thought to be certain death, or it to decapitate me, tear my throat out, slice my belly open, and spill my insides. I've seen movies, you know. These things, as I believed, killed anything that moves, and escape to safety was futile. I closed my eyes, but after that I could never open them again. I had passed out, fainted from fear and shock. And I also discovered, shamefully, that I had urinated on myself. I was in bed in my home. My cousin and aunt came in and tore my head off. They yelled that I was supposed to be back in an hour, but was out there for 5 before they were able to find me. They were worried sick about me. Then they asked why I had passed out. I explained what happened, and they seemed to get angrier and told me to stop playing games. I told them that it was true, but they still didn't believe me. And yet, still after 19 years, I still know what I saw. Tonight's second encounter. Recently, I received some bad news because my health is deteriorating fast. With the ongoing pandemic and my cancer diagnosis, I figured I would share my experience while I can. I'm in my 60s now, but this took place back when I was in my 30s. I was 34 or 35, I believe, when this all happened. Back then I was living in a suburb of Boise, Idaho called Caldwell. My grandparents lived north of there in an area known as Hell's Canyon Wilderness Area. The town they lived in was called New Meadows. It's a small town in Adams County along the Little Salmon River. Well, there's some fantastic white-tailed deer hunting up there on public land. I'd been driving up there hunting with my brothers, uncles, and dad since I was a teenager, so I'm very familiar with the area. I used to love it there until I had my experience in the woods. It was late summer, and a buddy of mine named Ryan and I were going to New Meadows, pick up some supplies that I stored at my grandparents' house, and head out and find a good spot and set up our deer stands. We got to one of the trailheads I was familiar with and started walking some trails, trying to find a good place to set up our deer stands. Nothing was out of the ordinary, a very normal day of scouting. We saw plenty of wildlife and a few other stands that were set up by other hunters. Some looked very recent, while others looked old and abandoned. After a few hours, we each set up our own individual stands in spots that looked promising to us. Now, Ryan's stand was about 1,000 yards northwest of mine, so the plan would be for us to walk together to my stand, and then Ryan would continue on to his every morning and evening. When the hunt was over, I would wait at my stand until Ryan would meet up with me, and then we would continue together back to our vehicles. Ryan was in much better shape than I was, and was about 7 years younger. We met at work, and both loved the outdoors. Well, we did. So fast forward to deer season. We're excited and eager to go hunting. So we executed our plan several times. Each morning or evening we would walk out together, split up, hunt, meet back up, and talk about how everything went. And what we did or didn't see while we walked back to the truck. So this must have happened 6 or 7 times, but after that, we would not always be able to get out and hunt because of work, family issues, or whatever. There was a few times. Either he or I would hunt alone, no big deal. Again, this was all normal. On the weekends, we would be together, but during the week, if either one of us had a chance, we would go at it alone. So one week, Ryan went out there alone a few times. I couldn't get away from work, so I would have to wait for the weekend. I would call Ryan and ask how everything went. Did you get anything? Did you see anything? Etc. He told me no. He saw some prints, but that was it. I told him that I would see him this weekend, and he told me that he couldn't make it. I was like, okay, no problem. I get it. Maybe next week. The next week came, and Ryan said he couldn't make it again because he wasn't feeling well. I asked him if he went during the week, and he told me no. Again, I thought nothing of it. But whatever. The next week came and went, but no Ryan. This continued week after week, though deer season would be over soon. Ryan loves hunting and fishing. This dude constantly talks about deer hunting. He has subscriptions to several hunting magazines. He watches hunting videotapes and goes to trade shows, everything. For him to suddenly look for every excuse not to go hunting seemed very odd. So I asked him, hey man, what's going on? You haven't been out in weeks. Is everything okay? He said yeah, that he was just really busy and that was that. I continued to hunt alone for the rest of the season. I failed to bag a buck that year, but was more frustrated that I seemed to have lost my hunting buddy. Over the next few months, I'd reach out to Ryan, and everything seemed normal. It was spring again, and I was talking about going out to scout for a new place this year, a new spot that would be better, and if he wanted to go up with me, we'd do it together. He said it sounded fun, and we got off the phone. A few weeks go by, and I asked if he was ready, and he told me he couldn't go, again with the excuses. He kept putting me off until he finally told me that he wasn't going hunting this fall. that he was too busy, and maybe some other time. I was shocked. So I went at it alone this season. I found a new spot that looked pretty good. I walked by Ryan's old location and his stand was still there in the tree. He never came and got it, so I figured I'd give his spot a try one day. So one morning I arrived earlier than normal because it was a further hike, and went all the way out to Ryan's stand. I climbed up and settled in. Everything remained normal for about the first hour. Then I noticed everything had gone quiet. I mean, deathly quiet, like I was in a vacuum or something. I could hear my own heartbeat, but that was about it. No birds, no insects, no squirrels or chipmunks, not even a breeze. I remember thinking to myself, man, this is crazy. I've never heard it this quiet before. Ever. This is strange. This continued for about 10 minutes. Then I saw something out of the corner of my eye about 70 yards away in the trees. I could see something moving, but I couldn't tell what I was looking at. I started feeling a sense of dread, like something was wrong. I don't scare easily, but I was suddenly struck with fear, and I didn't know why. This thing was moving around in the trees, but what it was doing, I don't know. I couldn't focus on what it was. I kept saying to myself, what the hell is that? What is that, man? What is it? That's when it jumped to a neighboring tree. That's when I got a better look at it. I say better because what I saw is hard to describe. I couldn't focus on it. Whatever it was, it had 2 arms, a head, torso, and 2 legs. I don't describe it as a man because what I saw was not a man. It was 6 feet tall, maybe shorter. It jumped to the next tree and just squatted on a limb surveying the area. I was too scared to move, so I sat there and watched with amazement. There was still no sound in the forest, and this thing just sat there. It looked like water, like liquid, like clear plastic. Whenever it stopped moving, it was impossible to see it. But when it moved, you could see it much better. The whole time I'm just thinking to myself, what the hell is that? Is that a Sasquatch? Is it a ghost? I don't know, and I don't want it to know that I'm here. I'm not going to move until it's gone. I continued to watch this thing intently, never taking my eyes off of it. Not even for a second. I don't think it saw me. It never gave any indication that it was aware of my presence, which now I'm thankful for. So for an hour I just watched this thing move around until it finally disappeared off into the woods. I quickly climbed down out of Ryan's stand and hightailed it all the way back to my truck. Sitting in the cab of my truck, I tried to wrap my mind around what I had seen. What was that thing? Am I going crazy? Am I losing my mind? Do I have a brain tumor? I must be hallucinating, but no, I saw it. I watched it for a long time, whatever it was real. I drove home and said nothing to anyone about the whole ordeal. I didn't want them to think I was crazy or something. I thought about it constantly over the next couple of weeks. When I was lying down for bed or taking a shower, driving alone in my truck, the memory would come flooding back into my mind. What did I see? Eventually, I contacted Ryan and asked if I could come by and visit. He said sure. So one Saturday at around lunchtime, I drove over to Ryan's, and we sat and chit-chatted for a bit about what he was up to, how life is, the normal stuff. Then I told him about my deer season, and how one day I hiked out to his stand and actually hunted in it. He looked scared. He turned white. He was looking at me with a strange look, and I'll never forget it. I said, dude, are you okay? He said, did you see anything? I said, no, man, I didn't see any deer. And he said, I'm not talking about deer. Did you see anything? At that moment, I knew what he was insinuating. I knew he knew something. So I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you exactly what I saw. So I told him everything. He said that he saw it too, and that I was lucky that it didn't see me. His encounter was much different than mine. He told me that the thing not only saw him, but basically forced him out of the woods. That's why he never went back. He wanted to tell me, but didn't know how. He sold all of his hunting equipment and never went back into the woods again. We talked for hours, and we still don't know what it was we saw. Ryan thinks it was a demon or some sort of alien. I still don't know. But I know it sounds crazy. I'm glad he saw it as well. Now I know for sure I didn't hallucinate the thing. I did see what I saw, even though I don't know what I saw. By the way, Ryan died 4 years ago in a horrible motorcycle accident. Maybe one day we will finally figure out what I saw that deer season. Today's third encounter. It was the fall of 1978, deer season in particular. I lived near a very small town called Suches, Georgia. It only had the population at the time of about 1,000 people. It's in the southeast end of the Chattahoochee National Forest. I'm an avid hunter, and I was hunting on public land in the National Forest just up the road from Suches, in an area called Cooper's Creek. I had scouted out this area during the summer, so late July, early August. I knew where all the game trails were. I knew where the water was located, which happens to be a small creek known as Branton Creek. And I knew where all the ridges and gaps were. I hunted in and around this area for years, so I was very familiar with it. Well, when I finally located a good spot, or at least a spot I thought would give me a good chance at a large buck, I set up my lock on a tree stand in a tree about 12 feet off the ground. I trimmed the branches to give me a good shooting lane and basically was all set for deer season. Oh, I was hunting with a 12-gauge shotgun. Rifle hunting was not allowed in this area. So fast forward to early November. I had been hunting out of my tree stand about 6 times by the time this particular hunt had happened. It was late afternoon, around 4:15. I wanted to get there earlier, but work had held me up. I had hired a new kid, and he was slowing me down all week. Anyway, this was a Friday. I finished up work, jumped in the truck, and headed out to my hunting spot. Now, this was my normal routine for a Friday afternoon during deer season, and my wife knew that I would not be home until about 8:30, and even later if I bagged something. I parked my truck at the trailhead and started hiking into the woods to find my tree stand. I walked about 20 minutes in. You want to walk pretty quickly, but not run. You don't want to make too much noise moving through the woods. You don't want to spook any wildlife. As I'm walking to my stand, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. I mean, it was very quiet. I didn't hear any normal chirping or singing of birds, no insects, nothing, and only a slight breeze. I thought it was a bit strange, but continued to my stand. I finally arrived and climbed up and settled in. Once I was comfortable, I jacked around into the chamber and put the safety on and began surveying the surroundings, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Sometimes deer bed down during the day, and you can spot their antlers above the tall grass and underbrush. As I was doing this, I began to have this ominous feeling that something was watching me. I don't really know how to explain it other than I had this deep feeling deep within me, in my core, in my gut, something wasn't right. Well, I tried to ignore it for a while, telling myself, stop being such a coward. There's nothing out here but you, some deer, hopefully, some squirrels, skunks, and other little critters. As time passed, the feeling only intensified. I kept looking at my watch, wondering how much time I had left until dusk. Should I leave early? I thought to myself. Of course not. A huge deer was probably only moments away. As I'm sitting there arguing with myself, I caught movement to my right side in the trees. I slowly turned my head and began looking through the tree canopy, and that's when I saw it. This is the part that still gives me chills. Even writing this now freaks me out because I honestly don't know what it was that I saw. As I was staring into the trees, I saw what looked like a large bodybuilder, but completely blurry, moving through the trees. I could clearly see the outline of a figure, but the rest was blurry, like I couldn't focus on it. It looked like a clear, gelatinous blob, but in the shape of a human, a large human. And whenever it would stop, I completely lost sight of it. It blended into the background perfectly. I just watched it for what seemed like an eternity, but in actuality was more like 15 minutes. It moved through the trees effortlessly like a monkey or a squirrel. It never really looked at me while I was watching it. Maybe it was before, and that's why I got the feeling something was watching me. I don't know. It moved slowly off, and I was scared about my walk back to the truck. So I waited for another 30 minutes. It's getting dark now. I slowly climb out of my stand. Once I hit solid ground, I wasted no time. I sprinted all the way back to the truck, jumped into the cab of my trusty Ford, and my lungs were on fire. That was the furthest and fastest I've run since basic training back in '67. I just sat there in my truck and tried to regain my breath. I drove home and said nothing to my wife or anyone for a few weeks. As time passed, I tried to convince myself that I imagined it all, that I had dozed off in the stand and had some sort of dream. But I couldn't get the idea of that thing out of my head, so I broke down and told my wife over dinner one night. She just listened and said it was probably my imagination. I later told my brother, who said something similar along the same lines. I never told anyone else, and I never hunted those woods again. I never even went back for the tree stand. It was only like $300, and I didn't want to go back there again, not for a measly $300. I took a break from hunting for about 10 years and started up again, but never in that area. I still wondered what it was that I saw that day. I have no rational explanation. Later, in 1988 or so, I saw the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Predator. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I jumped up and yelled to my wife, "That's what I saw. That looks just like it." I don't know if the writer had a similar experience as mine, and that's what inspired him to make the Predator cloak the way it did in that movie, or perhaps he heard some other eyewitness account, but that's exactly what I saw in those woods of North Georgia in the fall of '78. Mind you, not the reptilian-looking beast with lasers, but the cloaked part, like I stated previously. Today's fourth experience. I live in a very rural stretch of western Washington state. Here's my experience. It began in late July when I was forced to make semi-regular patrols around the property in which I live, heavily wooded, very hilly, and wet with a creek and swamp at the bottom. When I was made aware of local drug addicts attempting incursions upon the property. As most of you likely know, drug addicts have a natural tendency towards violence, especially the breed we have in my neck of the woods. I began carrying a rifle as I made my patrols because, as the old adage puts it, better safe than sorry. Very quickly I found their tracks at the bottom of the hill, and I even managed to claim a gas can as a kind of war trophy. That led me to believe they may be aiming to perform illegal logging on my property, which intensified my patrols. Soon after, I ran into a rather unsettling shape in the forest. I was on another patrol, standard routine procedure, when I passed an ancient cedar tree. I'd been past it 1.5 million times, but I suddenly felt as though I should take a seat underneath it and rest a while. I sat down underneath the tree and set my rifle and day pack at my side. I sat in silence and stillness for a while, taking in the sounds of the woods. I almost felt as though I had entered the same state of zen I had the year previously, kneeling beside a natural spring after a heavy rain. All was well, the world was fine, and everything would be okay. I felt wonderful. I opened my eyes and rolled my head to my right to look out into the grove of adler trees. Glancing upward, I saw a humanoid shape. It was roughly 15 feet in the air and had a distinct shape of a human head, neck, and shoulders, but no discernible bottom. It just seemed to fade away. The only way I can describe it is similar to the Predator movies, in which the creature uses a cloaking device. It was very, very similar to that device. At its edges, it seemed reality itself was embossed in that shape. I sat and stared at it for probably 3 to 5 seconds before an overwhelming feeling of dread and anxiety overtook me. I should add that I'm very tough to genuinely scare. I've been through a great many nasty situations that don't bear mentioning, to suffice to say that this shook me to my very core. I was almost petrified, scared out of my mind of what would happen if I dare move. I finally mustered the strength to remove my glasses and wipe them off on my shirt, and redonning them, I could see the shape was still there. The dread grew in intensity tenfold every few seconds, and my natural calmness, rational mind took hold again. I began counting down in my head. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When I reached 0, I thrust my arm under my rucksack's shoulder strap, grabbed my rifle, and sprinted home, saying a quick prayer as I ran. I haven't encountered it since, but believe me, there's more to this. I began asking around online about my experience, if anyone had seen anything similar. I was told time and again, talk to Wen. Wen's the person you should see. Well, I contacted Wen, and we talked over my experience before forming some theories. In that time, I was still performing my patrols, although I made a point to avoid that area as best I could. I eventually decided that I would visit again, and soon after I did. All was well, and it stayed that way for a few months, even getting to the point at which I'd talk aloud in the woods about my problems. I once even left a gift of food for whatever was there, but after talking with another party who shall remain nameless, activity picked up again. I still didn't see the shape, but I certainly felt the anxiety. Early in my patrols, I found a strange L-shaped hole as well, very near the spot. It was very cleanly made, not something an animal would scratch out of the dirt. The hole was very fresh when I first found it in September 3rd of 2016. I made sure I took photos. As summer wore into fall and fall into winter, strange things began to occur at the hole as well. Namely, large scratches were appearing near it, about 2 feet long and perfectly straight, as though someone dug their soul into the leaf litter on the forest floor and scraped hard as they could. I took photos of that as well, but sadly, those are lost. More on that below. I continued my patrols, making total sure not to bother the hole too much and keeping an eye on every single angle around me in a complete sphere. I made sure to start affixing my bayonet to discourage anything from jumping from the bushes or out of the tree if the rifle was slung over my shoulder. We have much to learn from Mother Nature, don't we? When I returned approximately a month and a half after for pictures of the scratches near the hole, things got worse. Usually anxiety sets in just as I would pass the cedar, but this time it hit immediately as I stood on the porch, camera in hand, and ready to document my findings. It got worse and worse each step I took towards that hole, climaxing as I took my photos. I wasted no time. I got my documentation, the lost pictures, and hurried back to the house, praying again as I closed the door, and thought occurred. It was windy. The hole is at the bottom of a ravine filled with large, old-growth trees. It suddenly got terribly windy when I was there. If stormy days are anything to compare, I would say winds were reaching 30 to 40 miles an hour at the bottom of the ravine, filled with wind-blocking trees. Temperature felt like it dropped about 20 degrees as well. I've been back since, but not often. Each time I visit, I say aloud that whatever is there does not have my permission to come with me back to my house. And, mostly assured, nowhere else I go. I've been there with a friend as well, but nothing strange happened in any of those instances. Tonight's final experience. This was a long time ago. I was a teenager. My parents were not strict, so I had a lot of freedom. I had 2 friends, and they were their own friends as well, and one of my friends' parents own a huge part of this forest. We, my friends and their friends, went deep into the woods with a bunch of supplies and started making our own tree forts. This was a big part of my childhood, building stuff with my friends, and this place became our sanctuary for a long time, where we'd spend a lot of our time away from the adults. This event happened years after we built the place, initially, and also after we rebuilt it because it got destroyed one time. But that's another interesting story for a different time. This is a backstory for the events I'm about to recall. Me and my one friend spent the night at our sanctuary we had built, which none of us had ever done before. We only hung out there and then went home. We all planned to spend the night together because it'd be fun. Most of our friends weren't allowed to spend the night there because of their parents, and the other that was allowed chickened out because too afraid. So it's just me and one other person, my close friend's cousin. We weren't close at the time, and we fought a lot, but surprisingly, we got along well that night. We spent most of the day swinging from trees, climbing them, hanging out on this tire rope swing we were talking. It was a normal day. Then we lay down to get some rest at around 9 p.m. About 10 minutes after lying down in our sleeping bags, talking to each other under our makeshift tents, we heard rustling. I sat up and saw the very tall silhouette of something that looked to be human-like but transparent. I could see right through it. I squinted and froze, and it very quickly climbed up a tall tree when I looked at it, disappearing. I was in complete disbelief and shock. I had no idea what I saw, or if I had hallucinated. I wasn't scared at this moment, just perplexed. Being young and worried, though, I said to my friend, we should leave. And not wanting it to hear me, I got close to his ear and just said, there's something in the woods looking at us. After I said that, I saw his facial expression turn into fear. So we got up and started walking down the path. Out of the woods calmly, I didn't want to sprint because it might chase, and also I wasn't sure what we saw. I'm just not taking any chances. We both, very shortly after, started leaving, got this weird feeling of deja vu and confusion. Like we were hit with hard drugs or something, except we don't do drugs and only ate food from our house. No hallucinogenic plants in our part of the country, nothing. Everything was slow, and I felt disoriented. But we continued to walk in this direction for quite a while, stumbling in the darkness because of our mental state. And I realized that we should have been out of the forest by now. I knew this was the way out 110%. It was because I've been going in and out of this place for years, even in the dark. Yet I didn't recognize all the trees around us, just the path. It was like our surroundings were changing. My friend randomly yelled, "Yeah, I'm coming," as I'm looking in the opposite direction from him, and I'd turned around and very confused asked him why he was saying that. He says his mom is calling his name to help him lead us out of the forest. I hear nothing at all, and I tell him I don't hear anything, and he looks at me like I'm insane. And as he walks off the path into the forest, I grab his arm and pull him back because I don't want him to get lost. That's when my friend sees the transparent thing I saw earlier, sitting perched on a tree branch in the direction his mom was calling for him. And he points it out to me. Its transparency is almost like a heat wave effect. We stare at it for 10 seconds in disbelief. It looked like a transparent being, but we were trying to discern it if it was something else, and we were just imagining it being alive because there was no movement. But then it hunched down like it was trying to stalk or be stealthful, and it quickly climbed up a tree a little more and went to the next one, then to the next one, getting closer to us. We did not hear it at all. It's completely silent. Its silence is exemplified by the fact that all the other creatures had gone completely silent, which I had only begun to realize in that moment that not a single bug or animal had made a sound since we were leaving. This is when our curiosity of if we were both tripping or were mistaking something turned into fear once we began to see it move. Once it got above us, though, the only thing we heard is the crunching of the branch has weight put on it. Every little sound that is made is so distinct because it's so quiet and remote. We can't see it because the top of the trees are so dark. We start actually running, terrified, not walking anymore. We hear noises in the trees above us until it fades away ahead of us, as if it ran ahead, but the sound was a lot quieter than if a normal animal was running tree to tree, as if this thing was light. But it wasn't small, so it made no sense. We still kept running forward despite it sounding like it went ahead, and we ended up back at the place we started. Many, many minutes of walking, and we're back at this place after running like 20 seconds. It's impossible. But instead of staying on the ground, we climbed to the top of the treehouse with our items as quickly as possible and closed the door, wedging a small piece of plywood on it to keep it shut. We hear something climbing up and extremely odd noises as well, like mimicking noises of rain and wind, but there's no water seeping into our treehouse with cracks in it, and it wasn't wet when we left. This persisted for a minute, and we didn't hear it again. I'm pretty sure that at that point it had left, but we spent the rest of the night there until the sun came up anyway. When he checked his iPod Touch for the time, this is right after we closed the door, it was 5 a.m. We started laying on the ground at 9 p.m. 8 hours had passed in less than 40 minutes of time. Hours after we could start to see the sun through the treehouse, we went home. I no longer talked to this friend, but after this incident we discussed it and said everything from both of our point of views, and we randomly brought it up to each other every few months and relived it, making sure we were still on the same page about what happened and what we remembered. I never spent the night out there again, and didn't even let myself stay out there past 5 p.m. for a long time. That's my experience, and I'm willing to take a polygraph test if the opportunity ever arises.
And there you have it, folks. I do hope you all enjoyed today's bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.